Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is June 26th, 2024, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Fry. Commissioner Kaiser.
Here.
Commissioner McClendon is not going to be here tonight. Commissioner Monteblanco.
Here.
Commissioner Rosenberry.
Here.
Commissioner Whips.
Here.
Commissioner Will.
Here.
Commissioner Maury Bidu.
Present.
Chair Lockwood.
Here.
We have 8 total present planning commissioners, so we do have a quorum.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we get started, I wanted to recognize that we have a new member, Commissioner Amber Rosenberry, and that brings us to 9, so we're at full strength now. And I wonder if I could ask you to say a little bit about yourself, what part of the county you live in, what brought you to this, what's your interest in planning?
I am in District 1 and I graduated from Aloha High School, went off for civil engineering degree and a business degree, and I've been managing commercial construction projects ever since. But really, if we look back to even my college application essays, it was all about the urban growth boundary. It was all about development in this area. 30 years have passed since then, and my interest is still there. So when the opportunity came up, I put my name in the hat.
Yeah. Thank you and welcome. Glad to have you. And I think we can reciprocate by saying a little something about ourselves. Who'd like to start with that?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to set up my laptop. I'm sorry.
My name is Felicita Monteblanco. I'm pretty new. I live in Aloha. I love parks and nature and yeah, all things local government. So welcome.
Awesome.
Commissioner Fry?
My name is Mike Fry. I live in Oak Hills, and I've been involved in residential construction and development for 19 years, as of 2 days from now, I guess, in the area, and work for a local builder developer. Got a political science degree in college and kind of blending the two together now, serving on the planning commission.
Again, I'm Deborah Lockwood, and I live outside the urban growth boundary north of Highway 26 in the Helvetia area. My working life was as a teacher. I got interested in land use when an issue came up in my neighborhood. And in we're researching that and thinking about that, I got really interested and thought this is important work. And after almost 8 years on the Planning Commission, I feel the same way. It's important work. So our friends on the screen, who would like to go next? Vice Chair Maury Bidu.
Thanks, Chair Lockwood. I'm Rachel Maury Bidu. I work in affordable housing finance for a not-for-profit lender and have studied environmental policy analysis and planning. So always kind of had a policy interest and interest in development and housing. And I live in the Bethany area.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Joe Kaiser. I work in HOAs, unfortunately, most of the time. 20 years of doing that. As Mike can tell you, that's basically like being in residential development. I'm just on the end where I get yelled at a lot. Fellow Aloha High graduate, so I just want to point out that's 2 of us on here. And I'm a former city councilor in Hillsborough and worked in politics for about 10 years. I have a political science degree. Local developer too. I develop land sometimes, if I can afford it anymore.
Commissioner Will.
My name's Morgan, last name Will, not to be confused with the other way around. This often happens. I live in the Cedar Mill area, and I liked to volunteer when I was young. I did a year of AmeriCorps after graduating college, which really solidified my enjoyment of volunteering. And so that's why I'm doing it, to give back to my community. And I have a degree in urban and regional planning, and I'm basically a planning consultant.
Commissioner Whips.
Jared Whips, live in the West Slope, and I guess I can kind of add to that a little high school as well. Only 1 year, then another school opened up that I was forced to go to, but so there's 3 of us now, sort of. Thank you very much for joining us. Just my interest is, first job was in North Plains, just driving back and forth the back roads of Shoals Ferry, and have been in the real estate industry for quite some time in the multifamily sector, and think it's a unique opportunity to volunteer and really just stay in tune with what's going on around us. So that's my interest.
Thank you, everybody. And again, welcome.
Thank you.
Our next item is the director's report.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. My name is Erin Wardell. I am the Planning and Development Services Manager here at Washington County, which brings me to the first part of my update, which is that I recently accepted a promotion to be the Assistant Director here of our Department of Land Use and Transportation. I am going to remain in my current role as well while we are recruiting for a replacement for me. So that's something that the Planning Commission will hear a little bit about. All of you have extensive networks, and if you know anyone who would be a great fit for that position, we will be doing a competitive recruitment a couple of months down the road from now. I'm really excited to be stepping into this new role and having a more of a leadership role with the entire department, and looking forward to continuing to work with our great staff, of course, here in Planning and Development Services. So it's exciting, but I've really enjoyed working directly with the Planning Commission as well. So looking forward to recruiting a great PDS manager to keep working with you in this role. So moving into the regularly scheduled items for your update today, I wanted to share that on June 4th, Chair Lockwood and Mr. Borkowitz participated in a County Boards and Commissions open house, which is an opportunity for members of our civic leadership and advocacy program to learn about the Planning Commission and other opportunities to volunteer and serve on county boards and commissions. A big update, many of you are holding in front of you your packets of our significant natural resources ordinances. So we did file 2 ordinances relating to our significant natural resources work. This is, I think, the largest packet I have ever seen. It's one of the largest I think we've had to put together for an ordinance, according to the staff who are working on putting it together. So the way that this works for our new members to understand is that we've now filed the ordinance 21 days, these 21 days before the hearing, as we were required to do. But you won't see the staff report until a week before the first hearing. So if you're looking at all these materials and saying, gosh, where's the staff report? That is on the way. And so we will get that to you before the first hearing. But what you have in front of you is the general notice and the ordinance language. You will be also receiving relatively soon the next ordinance that you'll be considering after those 2 ordinances, which is the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Parking Ordinance. That one is not as large, but it is still a pretty extensive ordinance. So if you have any questions about these materials, we will be having our work session tonight on SNR, and then further opportunities to get information about that, as well as the parking ordinance. I understand it feels a little bit overwhelming when you see that big stack of paper, but we're here to answer questions for you about that. So for today's meeting, as I said, we'll have the work session on significant natural resources. We also will have our deliberations on ordinance number 899, the North Plains proposed UGB expansion. For our July 10th meeting, which is a day meeting, we've scheduled 2 work sessions, and those both relate to the ordinances that will be before you. So the 2 SNR ordinances and the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Parking Ordinance. For the July 24th evening meeting, that will be your first hearing on ordinances 901 and 902, significant natural resources. We do expect that you'll probably need to have multiple hearings or multiple days to consider that. And so we don't think that will be the end of it. And then on August 7th at your day meeting, We're expecting that will be your first hearing on the climate-friendly and equitable communities parking ordinance. We think that it's valuable for planning commissioners to attend the hearings in person, particularly as we expect we may receive public testimony on these ordinances, understanding that may not be possible for everyone. So the hybrid option will still be there, but we would encourage you to be here if that's possible for you. And that concludes my director's report.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions for Ms. Wardell? Yes.
I have just mostly a logistical question. At work sessions, are commissioners encouraged, discouraged to ask questions? Would you rather us like ask questions of like, this is my first rodeo.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think through, like, I'm gonna read this. I'm sure I'm gonna have lots of questions. Should I email you those? Should I come ready to ask those questions at the next meeting?
It's actually pretty helpful for us to have them emailed in advance because then we can be prepared for them. And we also, usually if somebody has a question, other people have the same question and maybe they just didn't think to ask that question yet. And so when we reply to your email, we'll respond to the entire planning commission and then we're sharing out information that way. So I think that's pretty helpful, but I don't want to put pressure on people to feel like you have to do that either. If you don't think of your question until the work session or you don't have time to email us, perfectly fine to ask that. And that's why we've scheduled so many work sessions on these topics because they are very complicated and we expect that there will be a lot of questions.
I think I'm getting stuck on, so work sessions does or does not involve public comment.
Work sessions do not. Okay. Yeah. So work
That makes
sessions are
perfect sense.
just an opportunity for staff to share information. It really is the right time to ask a lot of questions of us because we're not under that formal hearing structure that we will be later in the summer.
Thank you for clarifying.
What we want to make sure of though, is that we don't get into deliberations in the work session. So it really is more about questions and that kind of interaction. And we don't expect that by the next work session, you will have read all of that and have all your questions. And some of your questions will be answered in the staff report. So there is time at the work sessions. There'll be time at the first hearing. And we're expecting, since these are so big, that there will be 2 or 3 hearings. And so there'll be time within that as well to ask questions if they don't get answered through the staff reports and the written and oral staff reports.
Thank you. And you can ask questions at the hearings too. So many opportunities.
Anything else for Ms. Wardell? That's the thing. Thank you very much. Next item is public communication. Is anyone signed up to speak to us tonight?
We don't have anyone signed up tonight. Okay. So we ask that people start by saying their full name and location. And looks like we have one person online who would like to communicate to the Planning Commission on a non-agenda item. And it looks like that person is Jim Long.
Hi, my name's Jim Long. I'm head of CPO4M, but I'm not here speaking for them. One of the things I've talked to you about earlier is I put together a bird and critter list that has over 373 different species of animals and all creatures that live in Washington County. But I want to speak about something that happened back on April 7th, early in the spring. We're here now in summer, but early in the spring at 7 a.m., 6 chainsaws started cutting trees and debris and underbrush in the yard in the nature park behind us, which apparently they were under the auspices of the county with Clean Water Services, and they wrecked the habitat. The habitat's been disturbed. This was during mating season and breeding season, and there aren't many birds that exist now around there. You just can't hear them. There is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, so there shouldn't be any grading or disturbing or cutting of things during breeding and mating season. And that's something that needs to be changed in a code for Clean Water Services or someplace. There should be times when it can happen and when it can't happen. Also, we didn't receive any notice that this was going on, so it was a total shock. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think habitat, the codes need to change, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Fine. Seeing nobody else, we can move on.
Okay.
Chair Lockwood?
Commissioner Will.
Well, perhaps we lost Mr. Long. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. If Mr. Long felt that this was regular scheduled maintenance that needs to be better scheduled, or was it a special project, if he's still available?
I don't see any
Well,
sign. Oh,
well,
he's here.
Yeah, I can hear you, Jim. Go
This
ahead.
was not,
What
this
did you
was
think?
not anything that was regularly scheduled. They just came in. I talked to them. I mean, my first impulse was to call 911 to have it stopped. I wish I had done that, but I didn't. But the one person cutting the chainsaw next to he said, oh, I'll get my supervisor. The supervisor came over and he said they were doing work for Clean Water Services. But this was unscheduled. This was not something that was supposed to be happening. And habitat's important for humans. It's also really important for wildlife. So I'm just looking for some protections so we can move forward and treat them. They live here too. So does that answer your question? Do you have another question?
Well, I guess you answered it. I appreciate it. I just was trying to get for the record if they tried to proclaim or answer to you, if you spoke with them that hey, they come out every year and do some trimming, or was this a special treatment to solve some special problem? Because what I'm hearing in your concern is that they should not schedule regular trimming right in the middle of mating season or a migratory season. They should schedule regular maintenance, at the appropriate time, is what I hear you're saying. But even worse, if it was a special thing, like they were getting ready for a manhole replacement in that creek bed location, that they should also schedule special events at the correct time. But I'm just curious if you have a sense of what you think was happening.
I don't think it was a regular thing. I would think they were cleaning out some underbrush.
No.
It could have been related to invasive species, but I'm not sure. I wish we had answers to those questions ahead of time or knew about them beforehand, because they just kept going all the way in many acres here. They kept going and going.
Okay.
And indeed, we talked to the guy and he said, oh, I'm a biologist, I understand. And he understood that they were destroying things. So my hands are up in the air. I don't know what to do except for come here and talk to you about this stuff.
And I'm sorry, did you say at the beginning of your testimony the date?
April 7th or April 9th. Let me see here. It was April 9th. Tuesday morning, the birds were already nesting. There's been a severe change in the hearing around here. The birds, the animals, they just aren't back like they used to be.
And I'm sorry, I guess another follow-up question is, you said behind your area where you live, did you have an address or a name of a park?
The name of the park, it's near Dirksen Nature Park. Summer Creek is in the back. This where I was that morning was at the end of 114th place.
Okay. Okay, thank you for those details.
It's a protected green space, or it's supposed to be a protected green space.
Okay, thank you for those added details. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Looks like we have no one else who wants to
All right.
share comments.
Thank you. Let's move to our work session on significant natural resources.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. Michelle Miller, Senior Planner, and Kathy Corliss, our consultant, will give the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. My name is Michelle Miller, Senior Planner with Land Use and Transportation. Tonight, we're also joined by Kathy Corliss with MIG Planning Group. She's our Principal and Project Manager Consultant on this project, and she'll be giving part of the presentation tonight when we get to our code concepts.
Pull that back a little bit so we can hear you.
Oh, this one? Okay. So at the last work session, we briefed you on the county's existing Goal 5 program for natural resources and talked about some of the state rules and requirements that have brought about the comprehensive plan and code changes that you'll soon be considering. We talked about the board's direction and introduced you to the work we've been doing in response to that. Tonight's work session zooms in on the Focus Look project, including our update to the natural resource inventory maps, a preview of the code concepts, and the community outreach and engagement that has been ongoing over the course of the 18-month project. All of this is to give you some more background and to become familiar with the topic and the process and to help you prepare for the hearings, which will begin on July 24th. And plenty of time for questions. Yes, go forward. So the significant natural resources, a focused look at fish and wildlife habitat, is based on our statewide planning goal 5 program. It's about identifying and protection of significant natural resources. This project has 2 categories of goal 5 natural resources that provide habitat for fish and wildlife. We undertook this project to respond to the state law changes and the legal challenges that we talked about at our last meeting. Here's our project website where people were able to get information about the project, sign up for updates, get background on Goal 5, and then we had frequently asked questions as well. And our significant natural resources, a focused look, followed the state required process for Goal 5. And this graphic shows the 3 main steps of that process for natural resources that we were following. It began with the mapping and identifying the natural resources. In our case, we started with the existing natural resource inventory mapping within the urban area and considered what is significant since our original mapping was done. As the inventory work was underway, we moved to step 2, the analysis phase, where we identified the major types of land uses that could conflict with natural resources, and then did some analysis to balance the level of protection of the resource with land uses like housing or transportation. Balancing also included getting feedback from stakeholders with different perspectives, including a technical advisory committee with representatives from various agencies and stakeholders as well, and meetings with the community to get feedback on our evaluation process. Final step is, the final step is taking that analysis and developing the policies and the land use regulations for development that have taken those impacts into account. And to help us through this process, we hired Kathy's firm to worked with an internal team and to get to work on the policies and the regulations, which is our step 3. Here's our project schedule broken down by the various tasks within the Goal 5 process. The bulk of the time has been spent on those updates to the inventory that helps the other steps by working on the analysis and developing the local Goal 5 program, culminating in the filing of our ordinances last week. The final step will be the public hearings with the Planning Commission and the board. This graphic shows the timeline when the community forums were held at the important project milestones when we first let people know about the inventory process, and then this past spring where as we were developing our and getting feedback on our code concepts. This map shows the urban area of Washington County. The gray color represents the incorporated or city areas, and the blue and orange areas show the urban unincorporated area, or the area within the urban growth boundary, but outside the city limits. This is the area where the county has jurisdiction and where the proposed rules will apply to those properties that might have significant habitat. The blue areas are where the bulk of our consultant team has done the work with the mapping and the analysis. Much of that area included was part of the original inventory work that the county did in the 1980s. Metro rules and requirements changed in late 2005 so that there are different rules concerning upland wildlife habitat, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. For those areas were added to the urban growth boundary, there was a change in 2005. These areas are those orange areas shown on the map. Metro has additional requirements for post-2005 urban growth boundary expansion areas that will be discussed a little bit later. The natural resource areas on the county's significant natural resource maps are collectively called the significant habitat. It includes riparian habitat like wetlands, rivers, lakes and ponds, and their wooded buffers, and are shown on the graphic in the center. And it also includes a portion of upland wildlife habitat, priority areas, forested and woodlands adjacent or upland to that riparian habitat, providing food, shelter, and mating sites for wildlife. So we noted that this is a limited update to our Goal 5 Natural Resource Program. One of the reasons for this project's title is that the board directed us to start with existing inventories and mapping that was done by the county and Metro as the basis for our update to the Goal 5 inventory. We had an inventory that was adopted in the 1980s to work from, and also a Metro inventory that was done more recently. So the first step in our process was to take the county and Metro maps within our map refinement area, that blue and orange area, and combine those two maps. For the riparian wildlife habitat, we applied Metro's mapping, and for the upland wildlife habitat, we considered the habitat areas mapped by both the county and Metro. Combining those into one consolidated map. Then adjustments were made to the map to take out areas that had been developed or maybe were annexed into the cities, or where the natural resources had been better identified through a development review process. And then we conducted a manual review and data cleanup. As part of this, we incorporated any of the more recent inventory mapping that might have been done by cities or the county, for example, in North Bethany or Bonnie Slope West, those areas that were added to the urban growth boundary since we had done our initial inventory back in the 1980s. As part of the initial refinement, we removed certain areas that no longer provided significant habitat, and we considered these factors, those developed areas I talked about, the small upland habitat patch sizes, properties that had been through the development review process, and finally, some very small habitat patches on individual lots, or so that there really wasn't a significant habitat remaining. The state Oregon administrative rules regarding Goal 5 require us to let people that might be included in the inventory know about it as early on in the process as possible. So last fall, we mailed a notice to about 4,000 property owners, letting them know about the project, and provided this web tool and other resources so that they could look up their property and see where the maps had identified the significant habitat. And here's a map of here's an example of a consolidated map that shows the natural resources, riparian habitat in blue, and the areas of upland wildlife habitat in orange and yellow. And those are those treed areas a bit further away from the riparian habitat. And here's the example of a proposed community plan significant natural resource map for the Bethany area. Our staff prepared these updated maps for all of the community plans, and they'll be part of the packet of information of the proposed changes that you'll see through Ordinance number 901. So the next phase in the Goal 5 process is the analysis phase. As I noted earlier, this is where we identify the major types of land uses that could conflict with the natural resources and do the analysis to balance the level of protection of the resource with the land uses like housing and transportation. And we're finalizing that work, and we'll talk a bit more about that at our next meeting, which will be July 10th. And our final step is to take that analysis and develop the policies and land use regulations that have taken those impacts into account. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, and she'll talk a little bit about the code concepts and give you an idea of what we're proposing. And then we'll get a lot more detail at our next meeting.
Thank you, Michelle. Again, my name is Kathy Corliss. I'm a principal with MIG, and I'll be presenting the next few slides. So that As Michelle mentioned, we'll be going over these in more detail in the July 10th meeting. But there is obviously, as she just described, an update to the significant natural resources inventory. There are changes to the comprehensive plan. There are changes to the community plan and the maps, as we just saw an example of those, as well as clear and objective standards in the Community Development Code for the protection of significant habitat. Significant habitat, what we're describing as riparian wildlife habitat. That would be, as we think of water-related habitat, and that in itself is made up of two parts, the water resource and that riparian area immediately adjacent. We have upland wildlife habitat, that's non-water related habitat, although often it is adjacent to riparian habitat, it isn't always. And again, the idea would continue to be that these things would be applied during the land use review process. So, I jumped ahead, but this is a good illustration of how that works. So significant habitat, again, the overall, we have specific regulations related to riparian wildlife habitat, upland wildlife habitat, and again, riparian wildlife habitat. It's the water areas, riparian buffers together. So those terms will become very familiar to you all as you read through the code. It's organized around that structure. So helpful to keep that in mind. As again, Michelle mentioned, there are these significant habitat areas, different regulations based on when land was added to the urban growth boundary. And so again, I think this is you'll see this as you review the code, you'll come to understand the distinctions between what we call pre-2006 significant habitat and post-2005 significant habitat. The reason for that year change is that that adoption was right on the cusp, right on the change of the year. So December 28th, 2005. And so that is the date set by the Metro Title 13, which is in the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan. And so those dates will also, you'll see those coming up in the regulations as you review those. There are general provisions that apply to all types of habitat. So those include density transfer. And also we're proposing a new adjustment section. And this is intended to allow developers or others to still maximize the housing and other uses on the land while meeting the habitat goals. So it allows reductions from dimensional standards. So again, perhaps if one could shift the setbacks on the development side or other feature, other requirements, it would allow the preservation of that habitat. So the idea is to allow some flexibility in those development standards, similarly with required landscaping and screening and buffering. There are some basic requirements for all applicants. So if the proposed development is within the verified riparian habitat, they need to demonstrate compliance with riparian habitat standards. Again, those are distinct and I would say more comparable to what's in place today for riparian habitat. If the proposed development is within verified upland wildlife habitat, applicants get one of three options. They can choose the tree inventory and retention option. That is the clear and objective option. As you probably are well aware, we need to have a clear path that is clear and objective for applicants to apply. However, sometimes that doesn't work in some situations, and we recognize that. So we're also including, the code also includes a tree canopy and assessment and protection standard. I'll talk a little bit about each of these. That option is available to the applicant, as well as a detailed environmental report option. Finally, if the applicant believes the map is incorrect, they can request a map correction. So those are the basic requirements. Now, focusing in on riparian wildlife habitat. There are use limitations for those areas. That's comparable to today. Those requirements are very similar to today. And there are exceptions for certain types of activities. We've done our best to make those exceptions clear and objective. I think we've succeeded, but I'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that. And there are, as I mentioned, 3 options for upland wildlife habitat. Option 1, this is our clear and objective track required by state law. The idea is that applicants would inventory and assess native trees greater than 6 inches in diameter. And these would be the trees within the significant habitat boundary. But out, and again, we're focused in this area on being outside riparian wildlife habitat boundary, because those areas are subject to other regulations, primarily through clean water services. So, but for these areas, we would be looking at regulated trees, the types of tree. Each tree gets assigned points based on its circumference or its diameter, and as well as whether it is a specific species or identified specific species get extra, shall we say, bonus points. And also trees that are proximate to riparian areas get some bonus points as well. The requirement is that a certain percentage of the tree points be retained on site, or if they can't be replaced, if they can't be retained, if you can't maintain the percentage, then they need to be replaced or with other tree points. And I'll talk about that now. So there's a special exception to make it for very small projects where they're impacting 10 or fewer trees. They don't have to do the full inventory. They can just inventory the trees that they're impacting. But otherwise, they would be, if it's, again, here we are with this adoption date, if it's in the pre-2006 UGB, 50% of the tree points would need to be retained. If it's in the later adopted areas, the post-2005, it's 80% of the tree points. And again, I think as Michelle pointed out, there's Metro, their Title 13 has specific requirements for those newer urban growth urban growth area expansions. So we're trying to reflect that in these standards. The applicant who, if they need to make up lost tree points, it's possible that they could do their development, no problem, still maintaining the necessary amount of tree points, they're done. If they can't, if they need to make up lost tree points, there's a wide range of options. They can preserve existing native trees that are not regulated trees because they're smaller than 6 inches DBH, or they can plant new native trees. The replacement trees can be inside or outside the significant habitat boundary, but not inside the verified riparian wildlife habitat boundary. And they do get more points, of course, because we're trying to encourage them to replace trees in the significant habitat boundary. Those are worth more points, but still there's a lot of flexibility there with how they can accomplish those tree points. And that's intended to make sure that that clear and objective option works for most people. But if it doesn't, there is what we're calling the tree canopy assessment and protection option. And that is not entirely clear and objective. So it will require some discretion on the part of staff making that decision, but that discretion is relatively limited. That is an option that's allowed under state law. If there's a clear and objective path, you can offer a discretionary path or paths as well. They have to offer a similar or greater level of protection as a clear and objective path. And I think we've done that. It's a different approach. So in the canopy protection, the idea is that you would, instead of protecting trees within the entire habitat area and maintaining points, you're identifying a specific area within the significant habitat area, 25 to 30%. The lower percentage is available if you are, if your canopy protection area is abutting a riparian area, and there's specific requirements for how much it has to abut, but you would be able to do the 25%, otherwise 30%. And within that area, the requirement is to maintain a 75% canopy cover. And that canopy cover, if it doesn't exist today, there's options to plant trees and to estimate what the tree canopy would be within a specified time frame. So again, that's an option that applicants can choose to meet the standard. And then finally, there's an option in the code for a detailed environmental report requirement. This would be much more discretionary. It does require a very detailed environmental report to be prepared. It has very detailed submittal requirements and approval criteria. We expect it's going to be a type 3 review. And it would likely or possibly require the county to seek out additional technical expertise, because it will be a very technical report that the applicant is submitting. And so potentially the cost of such a thing would be included in the fees for that. And again, that's that would be a third option if the other two options don't work. It is at least as protective, if not more, than the other options, but it has some flexibility to accomplish different types of mitigation. Oh, and I'm going to hand it back to Michelle with that.
I got enthralled with your presentation. So based on the board's direction, we have been busy with a robust plan for community engagement over the entire 18-month time period. We started with some summer outreach at community events about a year ago, all across the county, including 2 culturally based events, and we shared project information at farmers markets, for example, places like that. For the fall outreach, we mailed out those letters that I spoke about to property owners with mapped significant natural resources, letting them know about the project, and an invite to attend an in-person forum or participate in an online open house that ran for about 6 weeks. And we made that property owner lookup tool available to people, and that's still kind of an ongoing resource for people to use as well. In the spring, we followed up with postcards to these same property owners, letting them know about 3 different outreach opportunities that we had in March and in April. And there have been ongoing meetings with interested property owners, affected agencies, developers, the Committee for Community Involvement, Significant Natural Resources Subcommittee, technical experts, and individual property owners as well. Our communication team has been busy with website and social media updates as well. So regarding our efforts, as of last check, we had 463 people on our interested parties list, and 275 people have commented on the online map lookup tool, meaning they had questions about the mapped resource on their property, or they might have disagreed with where it was located and wanted to give us more information. So we had a lot of follow-up to do using our environmental consultant team to investigate those particular properties that came to our attention. 312 people were at the in-person fall community forum that we had, and we had 70 people comment on the online open house. This spring, 113 people were at the virtual and in-person spring community forums. So we had 1 virtual forum as well as 2 in-person forums, one at the Cedar Hills Rec Center and one here out at Washington Street. So we really tried to go to where the people were and try a variety of means to get the word out about the project and get feedback. We've received well over 75 emails and phone calls about the project to the questions that people might have.
And Michelle, if I can just add, those events and everything that we sent out were bilingual. So we were trying to reach all communities. And so we had translators and our materials were translated as well.
Thanks, Teresa. So we really have heard many diverse viewpoints on this topic. So I expect that that's maybe what you will also be hearing through the testimony. They had a wide range of interest, and we'll try to capture some of that. We didn't ever take a survey, a scientific survey or anything like that, but we've just really had a lot of feedback. And there, over the years, there's been a strong contingent of community members interested in adding natural resource protections in the urban unincorporated areas. So we knew that there were a lot of folks interested in this topic, and they've continued to advocate and support greater habitat protection. Some of the property owners that we reached out to are supportive of natural resource regulations that require retaining and replanting native trees. And many mentioned the Oregon white oak or large trees, or improving the wildlife corridor where feasible in the urban unincorporated areas. That was some of the feedback that we've heard. There also were some concerns about our draft concepts as well. Many property owners were concerned that having map resources on their property could affect their property value or future development potential. Regulations could limit what they're currently allowed to do on their property, like tree removal or adding on to their home. And the development community comments, they appreciated that the rules were not changing existing processes for sites with riparian wildlife habitat. They felt that those were sufficient. But they were uncertain about adding significant habitat that could be regulated, which was a change. They were concerned about adding costs for tree inventory or mitigation requirements. So moving on to some of the next steps. Last week, you heard we've reached a big milestone with the filing of the ordinances 901 and 902, and they're available for your review. I see some of you have some stacks to look at. Our email notice to interested parties goes out on Friday. And then we're also mailing notice to property owners with map natural resources on July 3rd. So that's another big mailing that's going out to property owners. July 10th, we'll have a planning commission work session, and that's going to dive even in more detail. And you might have a chance to have more questions as you look at the ordinances and the language. And we're going to talk more about the ESEE analysis as well. And then our first hearing is July 24th. And then we have two other planning commission hearings scheduled, one August 21st and the other September 3rd as needed. And then October 1st, we have scheduled the first board hearing on the ordinance.
And that was September 4th.
Oh, what did I say? Third. Oh, funny. Yeah. So now it's time to see if you have any questions.
Thank you both very much. Commissioners, questions, comments? I have a few questions. It might help to go back to the slide 18. And my question there was, we're at 18 yet, yeah. Oop, oh, 18 just went. The word within, if the proposed development is within the verified SNR, does within mean wholly within, partially within? You're nodding.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great question. So the portion of the development that would be within is so if, for example, you had something that you were doing that took up your entire site, but you were encroaching into, it would be the portion of the development that is within.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, right. Yeah. And I think and we'll go, of course, into this in great detail at your next work session, but the idea of a verified riparian wildlife boundary or verified upland boundary, there is a process that an applicant coming in verifies the boundary. And for the riparian boundary, for most people who are within the clean water services service boundary, then they would just get a verification from Clean Water Services, and it's basically the vegetated corridor. And for the upland boundary, they can either accept the boundary as it's mapped, which is kind of the clear and objective path to establishing that boundary, or they can go through a map correction.
And I'll go ahead if other commissioners are not wanting to jump in at this point. Slide 21, please. And that's about trees and replacing trees. And I was wondering if a significant natural resource area contains non-native trees that are still important for habitat. And how those are addressed. I mean, can you remove those because they're non-native? That's,
Yeah.
That's kind of the short answer, yes. So we're regulating the trees. The inventory would be regulating only the native trees. And there's a native tree list that you'll see of the trees that are included that are also 6 inches in diameter at breast height. That's a regulated tree. So the inventory and all the trees that are subject to the points are included. Are those. So if it's not a native tree, it's not regulated. Okay. And they can do what they don't get extra, they don't get points if they keep it, they don't get points if they remove it.
okay. Thank you.
Chair Lockwood, Commissioner Kaiser has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I had a couple questions. The first ones that comes to mind is if we're using the Metro Upland maps, why are we using the old existing county map anymore? I mean, it's from the 80s. Why aren't we just eliminating that and just going with the Metro map?
Well, in some cases, there was some overlap of the metro mapping and the county mapping. And there also were places where there were areas that were mapped and already in protected status that the county had mapped. And so that those areas, the county areas alone, are also included as important pieces of retained habitat.
Follow up, do we know if those are still significant? I mean, have they been degraded? Have they been ground truthed at all? Or are we just assuming they are because they were on a map from the 80s?
Well, they fit the methodology that we used for the metro inventory as well as the county inventory. So if it wasn't developed, if it was part of a habitat patch, all of those factors that made it significant, it went through that same threat identification process. And we used aerials, the same as if as the metro inventory.
So, but I guess the suggestion here is that because one thing was significant at one point, it is significant forever then, unless we adopt new maps that add more significant resources. That's kind of what I hear there. I mean, but we don't always know that something stays a significant natural resource over time if it's been degraded for any number of reasons, right? So I guess part of my question or comment here is we're relying on aerials for maps, we're relying on other people to map, and we're not really looking at it to make sure whether or not it is significant or not. I understand the expense involved there. Not ignorant to that, but it is problematic for me anyway. Couple other questions I had. I would like to see an old versus new overlay map that kind of shows us what the progression on this. I know we've had this kind of go through a couple of different iterations with the courts, and I would love to see how the map has changed over that time, if possible, at least from where we started to where we're going to be at the end of this. I don't want to make too much more work for somebody, but I would like to see some mapping that actually showed that overlaid versus where we have been, if that's possible.
And if I could just jump in on this a little bit, because we have something mapped doesn't mean that we're positive we're right about that. And so if it's mapped and nothing's happening on that property, nothing happens. But when a property comes in for development, that's when we require the actual ground truthing, inventories, delineation, any of that would be necessary in order to confirm what is actually on the site. And then that informs what part of the process the developer goes through next.
And also it's about trees and whether there's native trees of meeting that threshold. So that's really kind of the determination that it's significant. It's been identified. So if that site's degraded as you speak and there's non-native trees or there's no trees at all, then there's there's nothing to inventory or there's nothing to protect through the course of development.
And
Uh,
Commissioner, to your second part of your question about how the maps have changed over time. So part of what you'll see in your packet, and they are 8.5 by 11s, so it may not be super clear. There are 11 by 17s on the website. But there are the old community plan maps and then the proposed maps. So you'll be able to compare those two. It's not an overlay because would be very, very difficult for us to show because there was a lot of overlap between metros and ours but we also will have a report shortly, the EC analysis report that will have a number of tables. I think the inventory will as well, that talk about how many acres were in each of the categories and how does that look now? So what it was and what it is now. So you'll see a lot of that information shortly.
Okay, couple other questions. Assume we're going to the point system, or the thought behind the point system is that's a clear and objective standard, right? I mean, you got something you can count theoretically, right? What do we have? I mean, perhaps that part isn't totally developed yet, but do we have an idea of how that point system works and the width and breadth of it? Is it, a 10-point scale, a 100-point scale? Kind of what do we have there?
Well, it's based on the size of the trees that are native 6 inches or more, and we'll go into that more at the next meeting that we have. So I think I don't think there's a maximum points that
no, there's
Yeah.
not. So I mean, certainly I would think, a 100-year-old oak tree with a very substantial diameter, would get both the points for its diameter as well as the bonus points for being a white oak. So that's where you would see the most trees, or excuse me, the most tree points. So if one were to preserve that on a site, it would, and you were keeping 50% of the tree points, keeping that lets you maybe remove other trees that are, going to be balanced by that to achieve that 50%. So it's not saying you have to keep that particular tree, but it is certainly going to, we hope, encourage people to keep those large, in particular the white oak. That's why the bonus points are there for that. So because we did hear from the community and of course, there's a lot of interest in protecting those trees. They're an important part of our habitat. So
to that question, I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing. I just did have one more question on that tree side. Dealing with in several associations that I work with, the Mediterranean oak borer beetle. So we look at the number of points associated with a white oak tree that is clearly valuable from a habitat standpoint, but is completely infested and infected and is going to die. Maybe it hasn't died yet, but we know it will. How do we deal with that? Would that be part of the development process when you get in, you take a look at the tree? I mean, obviously that's not something you can deal with here in the inventory, I don't think, but it would be, in my mind, when you get down to that development period where you're going through that process, that's where you would look at it, right?
well, actually, we recognize that was going to be a problem. And not just for that species, sadly, but for others as well. So there's an exception for diseased and dying trees.
Okay.
And yeah, so there's a separate process for that. And there's a kind of a different process and that you could go through, that you could remove those. We obviously recognize that's a concern. So,
thank you.
as well as hazard trees, I should say. Following the ice storm this last, winter, we got a lot of comments and concerns about hazardous trees proximate to dwelling units and that sort of thing. So also include some exceptions for that as well.
Yeah, take a look at those in the section.
Yeah.
And so, Commissioner, we mentioned that the commissioners that are here, we just today got our copies made of the two filed ordinances. So those who are here, we have just given them to them. The rest of them will be mailed. So you'll get those in the next day or two. And all the points, the calculations and all of that are included in those ordinances.
Other commissioners, questions? Yes.
Appreciation, that really helped my brain. And I'm gonna read this and then come up with a lot of questions.
Good. I had one other question, on slide 24. Slide 24 talks about the preservation area.
Yes.
And I wasn't positive what the preservation area is.
And again, we will be going into a lot of detail on July 10th about this.
Okay.
This is just a sneak preview, but the idea of this option, if the applicant chooses it, is instead of looking at all the trees in the entire significant habitat area and then figuring out the tree inventory and the points, this option says, well, we're looking at you identifying an area, you, the applicant, identifying an area within your significant habitat that is 25 to 30% if you're in the pre-2006 UGB, or larger if you're in the post-2005 UGB. Again, Metro has expectations for those areas to be protected. So we're looking at a different standard there. But you, the applicant, identify the area, the polygon that you'd like to protect, or if it's a really large site, we have a process that they could identify multiple polygons and achieve, because they are going to be, if they have a lot of significant habitat and a large site, they might want to do it in 2 areas. There's some minimum size and dimension standards. But within that area, which you identify on your site plan, you then have to demonstrate that you're going to either maintain or achieve a 75% canopy cover. And there's other requirements about, removing non-native species and so forth within that area. So that becomes, and that's actually perhaps a little bit more comparable to the way that the code works today, where applicants are identifying a specific area that goes into a separate tract that is the protected area. The tree inventory approach, option 1, doesn't require you to set land aside. It's about protecting trees within the overall significant habitat area to achieve those points. So it's a different way of thinking about it. But this, I would say, is a little bit closer to maybe the types of protection that you've seen in the past with development proposals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair Lockwood, Commissioner Will has his hand up.
Thank you. Commissioner Will.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I know that a lot of this effort is about creating clear and objective standards for applicants when they apply, but a portion of it is this mapping process. Can you just clarify, did I hear correctly that as part of the map, update or map review, you looked at areas that had been developed and then so you removed them from the boundary, or you looked at areas that were like, maybe I guess this is the root of my question. If you just like clipped the corner of a property by 10 feet, and so that property doesn't have like more than 25 square feet of significant natural resources on their land, their current property boundary. Did you say you removed that lot from the overlay because it's it's so minor? How does that work when you decide whether to include a property in the overlay? If it's clipped by just a little bit, is it in, or does it have to be 50% of the property, or how did you guys make that decision?
So our consultant, I think the approach was to look at the site, and if there was less than 500 square feet of habitat on an individual property, that would be removed. That wouldn't be included. That part would be off of the inventory on an individual property. It was 500 square feet. And then there were some larger patch sizes that were evaluated to see, when a habitat patch was 3,000 square feet, but it was around 3 or 4 properties, kind of looking at that smaller habitat patch sizes. Is that really a significant habitat patch? And our consultant kind of looked at those more specifically, and that was the threshold for multiple habitat patch on multiple properties.
Yeah, because I would assume one of the concerns of a property owner is if they trigger a requirement to go and hire somebody to do a tree survey simply because the back 10 feet are in the buffer, but their front 105 feet are not. And that the 105 feet is where they want to develop, and the back 10 feet causes them a whole bunch of extra cost because a 10,000 square foot aerial or 10,000 foot aerial analysis clipped the back corner of their property. So with using GIS, you can, whatever that overlay is, as smooth as that is, will that be a process where, like, okay, the boundary of these will be kind of like a saw blade, because it'll omit certain properties, even though a smooth line would overlap the rear 10 feet, you're going to omit that property from the boundary because it's not 500 square feet?
We had a process to look at that, and GIS has a way of removing properties that have that type of situation. So we tried our best to capture all of those that met that, but also when you look at the other requirements of clean water services, so that all clean water services rules apply regardless of whether a property's mapped or not. So
Right.
you're getting the riparian areas. For upland habitat, we're looking at trees, right? So if it's that small of an area, there might not be any native trees of that size. So there are some fail-safe measure, I can't think of the right word right now, but measures to kind of alleviate those type of circumstances.
Yeah, it sounds good. If you're using the GIS tools, that sounds good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Vice Chair Mori Bidu.
Thank you. I'm just curious, based on some of the comments and feedback that you received already, have map changes already occurred? And what is the actual process that someone would have to go through in the future to do a map change, and what's the timeline and things like that?
Well, with the property resource tool, we did get a lot of feedback from, as you saw, from property owners saying, well, that's my yard, there's no trees there. And we worked with those properties to kind of evaluate individual properties. So some map corrections have been made. We will have a process in the development code, and you can see that for making map corrections to verify the boundary, as well as to have it, as well as to find where applicants can show changes. We're looking at trees within a habitat boundary, and there's ways to make those map corrections within the code.
Yeah. And Michelle, if I could add, I think the other opportunity for property owners is that, and you'll see this in the draft, is that there are exceptions, and some of those exceptions for the upland habitat area are specifically mirroring the map correction methodology that Michelle's describing. So there's, a property owner could come in and say, well, wait a minute, this should have been removed as a part of the inventory process. You guys didn't catch it for whatever reason, and here's how I meet that. Or, there are allowances for an exception and an allowance for existing residential development to, maintain a disturbance area. So in recognition that sometimes it isn't obvious where it is somebody's, in an aerial photo, maybe that was somebody's garden, or wait, there's a disturbance area underneath that tree canopy. So there's also you'll see those exceptions. And those are really in response to the comments that we heard and trying to recognize that, while we did the best we could, there are going to be opportunities for people to come in later, and there should be kind of exceptions to recognize those, as well as a map correction process. So I think that we've tried to tackle it from multiple fronts, that concern, because we did hear it loud and clear.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for the presentation. So I'm going to propose a 5-minute break at this point. Is there any objection to a break? All right. You in 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea. I said all day.
I saw this.
Hey. Sure.
I saw Rachel on the screen. So uh, is Vice Chair Maury Bidu here?
Yeah, my video is just not
Okay.
cooperating.
Thank you. Well, let's resume. The next item on our agenda is our consideration of ordinance 899. The North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Expansion. And who is presenting on this?
Mr. Berkowitz, we did the presentation.
So good evening, Chair Lockwood and Planning Commission members. I'm Todd Borkowitz, Senior Planner at Community Planning with the Department of Land Use and Transportation. So tonight we're continuing ordinance number 899 relating to the expansion of the North Plains Urban Growth Boundary. So as some of you may recall, North Plains has its own urban growth boundary, or UGB, that is distinct from Metro. North Plains UGB expansion, like that for Banks, and Gaston, is governed solely by state rules and not by Metro rules. So Oregon cities must plan for 20 years of housing growth. State law also allows cities to plan for 20 years of economic growth based on the types of industry the city aims to attract. Cities must accommodate the growth forecast within their existing UGB, or when the forecasted growth cannot be accommodated, cities can follow a state prescribed process for UGB expansion. North Plains followed this process, and Washington County and other partners collaborated. Once this is complete, both city and county must each adopt the same proposed UGB expansion prior to state acknowledgements. So North Plains adopted its UGB expansion ordinance in September 2023. The originally proposed UGB expansion area is shown here in shaded dark. The expansion included approximately 855 acres, including 167 acres for housing land and 688 acres for employment land. The originally proposed expansion was primarily north of US 26 and to the east and west of the current city limits. It included 34 acres south of US 26 and south of the current North Plains UGB. So after North Plains adopted the city's UGB expansion ordinance, the county filed ordinance number 899, its ordinance for North Plains UGB expansion. On October 18th of 2023, the PC held a hearing on the ordinance, then closed the hearing and continued deliberations to November 15th. On November 15th, the PC discussed the ordinance, then continued deliberations to December 6th. On December 6th, the PC continued deliberations to June 26th, today, after the May 2024 referendum vote was held and after the results were certified. The Washington County Board of Commissioners had noticed the first scheduled hearing on ordinance 899 for November 28th of 2023. On November 28th, the board held the ordinance hearing, then closed the hearing and continued deliberations to July 16th, about 3 weeks from now. So here's the timeline for actions related to ordinance number 899. As we began the hearings last October, we soon learned of the referenda petition opposing the city's ordinance. At that hearing, county staff detailed and indicated support for the city's UGB expansion process and recommended that the PC recommend approval of ordinance number 899. The PC received extensive testimony both in opposition and in favor of UGB expansion, and North Plains mayor and city staff advocated for the expansion and answered questions that the PC posed to them. The referendum petition would eventually receive sufficient signatures to qualify for the May 2024 ballot, despite some conflicting actions taken by the 2024 Oregon legislature in March. County elections directed the referendum vote to occur and that results be posted. On May 21st, North Plains voters overwhelmingly rejected the city's UGB expansion ordinance. So once again, the UGB expansion is by a non-metro city requires three levels of approval. One is adoption of an ordinance by the city. Second is adoption of the ordinance by the county. And the third is a review and acknowledgement of the adopted ordinances by the state of Oregon. Since North Plain voters rejected the city's ordinance, the county's ordinance 899 cannot move forward. The city now requests that the county reject ordinance 899 as the city of North Plains considers its next steps. County staff will continue working with North Plains. If the city proposes UGB expansion in the future, the county can again file a new UGB expansion ordinance at that time. And so given this, staff recommends tonight that the PC recommends that the Board of Commissioners reject ordinance number 899. And attached here, shown here, is a sample motion that you can use to do so. And that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Go back one slide.
Are there questions for Mr. Borkowitz? Commissioner Will.
Yeah, I remember what you said here in the presentation, that the staff recommended that the planning commission vote to support this ordinance, but now, and at the time, it was understood that at least procedurally, if not emotionally, the city did their due diligence and did the steps they were needed to. And that's the reason why staff recommended we support it at that time. And so the referendum vote is seen by staff as negating them doing it right. Is that basically the conclusion? Is they had done everything right until now. Now this is making everything else wrong.
We're going to have county council answer this.
If I could answer that, it's more than just the referendum vote. It's the litigation and House Bill 4026. You may recall that after that recommendation, a few months after, the legislature passed a bill purporting to preclude the use of a referendum for a UGB expansion ordinance. The day the governor signed that, litigation was filed. That litigation is ongoing. But in the meantime, the court issued a temporary restraining order requiring the county to conduct the referendum election. And then we have the results. So the litigation may very well proceed to decide at some high-level court in a year or two or 3 or 5 as to whether that litigation was effective or that legislation was effective and whether or not its referendum applies. But city staff informed county staff that you should reject the ordinance because essentially we're not prepared to proceed at this time. If hypothetically, purely hypothetically, some high court later says you can't use a referendum on a UGB expansion ordinance, or the city tries a second shot at it with maybe a different boundary or what have you, we would start a brand new ordinance anew with fresh hearings at some future point, hypothetically to be determined. So no, it's not a matter of county staff changing its mind as a result of the referendum election. It's a much more nuanced and complicated than that, as I've just explained.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess my follow-up question is if somebody had submitted a subdivision application or a zoning change application, that applicant can always withdraw their application. Is the city staff asking us to reject it because they can't withdraw it? They need some sort of conclusion? Or do you I don't ask you to speculate, but is that the reason?
Well, that might be a way to characterize it, but city staff has no power to withdraw a county ordinance.
Okay.
Under county charter, our board can only take 3 types of actions, either to approve, amend, or reject. I know that's harsh words or whatever. Rejection doesn't mean you disagree with the ordinance. It just means the ordinance is not moving forward. But city staff has no power to do that. All city staff has the ability to do is ask county staff to ask you to recommend to our board that they reject the ordinance.
I appreciate that clear and solid explanation for why the staff is making this new recommendation. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? All right. Is there? An attendee with a raised hand?
This is not a public hearing. The public hearing has been closed. This is active deliberation of the planning commission. So a question would not be appropriate this time. If the chair wishes, I have no objection to maybe later on in the agenda reopening public input, and I'm happy to answer any other questions folks might have, but we cannot have the public involved in your deliberations.
Thank you. So at this time, we can move ahead with a motion if the commissioner would like to make a motion.
Commissioner Will has.
Commissioner Will, yeah, sometimes it's a little, I don't
Don't
quite
worry.
see.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I'll be patient. Chair Lockwood, I move that the Planning Commission recommend rejection of ordinance number 899 to the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Fry. All right, it's been moved and seconded that the Planning Commission recommend rejection of ordinance 899 to the Board of Commissioners. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Kaiser.
Chair Lockwood, I'll be voting no on the motion for a couple of reasons. One, obviously the judicial process is going to work out the way it's going to work out. But from my perspective, if our original recommendation was to move forward with a recommendation from staff, and if an individual planning commissioner agreed with that, that doesn't change for what ended up being or essentially could in fact be an illegal vote that was done that didn't necessarily have any influence. So from my perspective, I'm going to go ahead and make that vote. I certainly don't anticipate anybody else doing so, but that's how I'll be going.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just say I definitely understand Commissioner Kaiser's point there. I think just listening to the recommendation from county and county council's explanation of things, the process is going to work out in a different way, but I hear you on that.
Commissioner Will.
Yeah, this is a follow-up question then related to Joe's Kaiser's statement. Mr. Bovett, what would happen if the Planning Commission voted to approve and then of course hypothetically the county voted to approve? Would it just sit there mute during the during all the legal wranglings and then maybe become non-valid if the opponents prevail? Or
so that's speculation upon speculation. That would mean you would recommend, I guess your hypothetical is you recommend our board approve the ordinance, despite the fact there apparently is no step one, and our board agrees with you, and then they hypothetically approve it without a step one. My hypothetical projection is that would lead to a LUBA appeal and further litigation. Yes.
Just to conclude my comment, so I appreciate your position, Joe, and I sort of ran through that in my head, and I'm going to be voting no to eliminate that risk of further expense to the county.
Commissioner, the expense.
Just to clarify, voting no means you would vote no on the motion to reject the ordinance.
You don't want to do that, Morgan.
Yeah, I meant I'm going to vote yes on the motion so that there is no approval. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Wood.
Commissioner Kaiser.
I just want to clarify one thing. This is not for me about trying to create more expense for the county or for anyone. Really, for me, it's about a firm belief in the fact that we have a UGB process. The process is based on a firm set of achievable and attainable goals. And if the city achieved those goals, then the process should move forward. It's not a value judgment on the folks of North Plains decision. It's their city. I understand that. I don't live there, and it's not my business from that perspective. From my perspective, it's a situation where this is something I personally oppose in the UGB process. I don't think this is the kind of thing that should be injected into there. And I also don't think, from my perspective, that we should be able to slow down UGB processes with legal maneuvers like this. I just don't. So that's really where my decision comes from. It's certainly not any more than that.
Other comments?
I have a point of order.
Sure.
Since I was not a commissioner during previous hearings, do I vote on this?
Mr. Bobette.
That's up to you. If you don't feel comfortable, you could feel comfortable abstaining. If you had reviewed, so our PC rules allow you to review old hearings and take action even as a new commissioner. But that's entirely your comfort zone.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Will.
Mike, thank you, Chair Lockwood. My question is for Mr. Bobette. Can you confirm that this is a legislative decision we're making a recommendation towards?
In my opinion, ordinance number 899 is for land use purposes, a legislative matter. And I use carefully words there because the difference between an administrative action and a legislative action for constitutional referendum purposes is different than the difference between a legislative action and a quasi-judicial action for land use purposes. That sounds like a lot of legally gobbledygook, but your question was loaded whether you intended it to be or not. And that is the subject of ongoing litigation in the case of the Lesmeister case that I referred to.
Yeah, I'm mostly asking for clarification for us voting commissioners to make sure we understand whether we can make our decision based on personal feelings and like Joe has suggested he's going to, and whether we can feel okay doing that, or whether we feel we should not.
I feel comfortable.
Because we can make the decision on personal opinions as well as the facts presented to us.
Well, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I can assure you this is not a quasi-judicial matter. I feel confident in that. I feel that for land use purposes, this is a legislative matter. For purposes of the referendum provision of the Oregon Constitution, the elections official that I represent in that litigation has taken no position on that, but trust me, there are litigants in that case that are arguing vociferously about that precise issue.
Okay, thank you for that statement.
Any other comments? My comment is, what's really pertinent to me is that North Plains has requested that this matter end at this point. So I'm going to be voting yes on this motion. So it looks like we're ready to take a vote. Would you put the motion back on the screen? Okay, the motion is that the Planning Commission recommend rejection of ordinance number 899 to the Board of Commissioners. And may we have a roll call on that, please?
Sure. Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner Kaiser?
Yeah.
Commissioner Monteblanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberry?
Yes.
Commissioner Whips?
Yes.
Commissioner Will?
Yes.
Vice Chair Maury Bedew,
Yes.
Chair Lockwood.
Yes.
We have a total of 7 who have indicated yes, so the motion does pass.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. The next item on our agenda is consideration of minutes, and we have two sets of minutes. The first one to either correct or approve as submitted. First one is from May 1, 2024. I had one correction for that, or this is the second page. The bullet points there, most of the way down on the first one. Climate mitigation for tree canopy is critical to addressing climate change. And I was thinking that the word "for" is a little confusing. Climate mitigation by means of the tree canopy, is that what that means? I don't know if everybody's caught up to the spot, but where I'm talking about. It's the third one up from the bottom of the first set of bullet points.
On the CFAC item.
Page 2.
Maybe group, climate mitigation group.
Sure, yeah. I just thought
See the 7th bullet, Teresa.
4 was kind of confusing.
And what were you suggesting there?
Well, we have two, Commissioner Monteblancos saying through commission.
Might be slightly
Yeah,
better.
climate mitigation through tree canopy. What came to me was climate mitigation by means of.
Oh,
which
that's
would
better.
just be- Yeah. So we're gonna go with by means of. All right. Any other corrections on this set of minutes? Without objection, then this minutes for May 1, 2024 are accepted as corrected. The other set of minutes is for May 15th, 2024. Are there any corrections for this set of minutes? I'm not seeing any. Without objection, the minutes for May 15th, 2024 are accepted as submitted. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is Planning Commission announcements. Does any commissioner have something they'd like to say this evening? At this point? Not seeing any. All right. Next item is adjournment. Without objection, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.